Reconnection successful. Okay, OBS is back. Give it a second. We should be back on Discord. Yep, there it is. Hello? Hey, what's up? Can you hear me? Oh, it's still connecting. Hi, stream. Sorry, that had to go down. Oh my fucking god. Did my internet just go down again? Well, at the very least, OBS is reconnected. I can't see Twitch right now, so sorry people are talking, but my internet went down, and now it's back, which is pretty cool. Kyler, can you hear me? No, he can't. Oh my god.
Oh.
Oh, hello.
Hey.
God, you would not believe how unstable my internet is right now.
Oh gosh.
I don't know how long this is going to hold up, but we're just going to try.
All right.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We had a really good time
All
with
right.
that, didn't we?
Yeah. So
I don't remember.
I don't know.
I mean,
how
I
much
didn't.
did you?
I guess.
How much did you miss?
I don't know. It just kind of
'Cause
cut out really suddenly. I don't even remember where we left off.
Yeah, because you you had talked about Monster Hunter, and then I don't know if you actually just stopped to give me like time to talk.
No, I
or
did
if
not. I did not.
Cutting out. Okay, that might have been why I was kind of confused when you came back and you said that. So, if I remember correctly, you had talked about you build up your experience of the game, like you realize how to fight these monsters as you go, and like you get better at the game going through the game, rather than just I have a set of skills on the game. I'm just improving myself as I go.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's hard. I wish I'd like thought about this more and come up with like what to say about like why I like this game so much. But honestly, the big thing about it is that like Monster Hunter is not known for having an amazing story. Monster Hunter doesn't focus so much on the lore of the world, even though the lore of the world is actually quite interesting. The game is about hunting monsters. Wouldn't you know it?
Yeah.
And the thing that I like about it so much is that like these monsters that like maybe you found super difficult before aren't so hard now because your skill as a player has grown so much. And that's not to say that like liking a game for the story is wrong or anything like that. I don't want to. I don't ever want to say that because there are plenty of games that I like for the story. But my point is that I love this game so much because it isn't only a good story that's holding it up.
Yeah,
it's got amazing gameplay that like I am very good at the game because I've worked so hard to be good at the game.
Yeah, and I kind of I guess I kind of echoed that point where in my view of Monster Hunter, I don't play a lot of games like that. I mean, I play what's it called? I played Warframe. In the part that you missed, I talked about. I played Warframe and these other games that you kind of build your skill as you go. And being the two ends of the gaming spectrum, I say you and I are. You're more of the gameplay focused, and I'm more of the story focused.
Yeah.
Like I more had the idea of I get my tutorial right off the bat. I learn everything about the game right there. And then if I have a late game tutorial down the line or something, it's not that much of a problem because I can deal with that. I can think on my feet, stuff like that. But when you have a game that forces you into that idea of like, hey, build up your understanding of the game as you're going, and as the longer you play, the better you get. is something that once I realized how to play it, it felt a lot better of a game to
Exactly.
me. And I think, like, you know, it's hard to marry both sides of those spectrums where you have a good story driven and it's also got very, very good gameplay in the sense that you're doing. But if you can do it well, I think it benefits both the person playing the game and the person making the game, because, you know, they did something that is pretty hard in this genre or this genre of media of gaming. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's such like both parts are so important, and that's why you end up with like people like me and you who are so like heavily on one or heavily on one of those two sides a lot of the times. But it is so important if you can manage as a developer to make a game that both has an amazing and engaging story and world that's like, I just want to play this game because I like being in this place, and you can make a game where just it's constantly about like, oh, I figured out how to do this finally, and now I'm better at the game for it.
yeah.
That is, to me, like the best way to make a game.
I think another thing that kind of, and I think that the next game that I'm gonna talk about here, kind of, you know, it doesn't do the bridging of the two, but I would say it's the one game on my list that would probably fit on your list as well of games that you really enjoy, and that's Darkest Dungeon. Ever since, and I was actually, I was gifted the game through a friend, and I was like, well, this looks like an interesting game. I'd seen, you know, streamers play it. It was a roguelike dungeon crawler, and you got these heroes, and you take them through a dungeon, and as you go, you can lose the heroes, and there's permadeath, like a typical roguelike would have. And once I actually started playing it, it actually kind of turned on that side of my, you know, brain where it's like
The gameplay side.
Yeah, I have to learn as I'm going, because anyone who has played Darkest Dungeon, and I know it's a pretty controversial game. I've had some heated discussions about, you know, is it a good game or is it a bad game? Because I have people who, they say that, you know, if something is going to force me to, you know, I can go in with super prepared, I have everything that I need, and all that, and I can still lose, then it's not a good game. But in my mind, that's the kind of thing that makes that game unique, and I think it's something that actually makes that game a lot more enjoyable.
Okay.
Because I know that I have a good understanding of the game. I can, you know, manage my stress level, which is another thing that in this game is pretty cool. Because it's like, oh, hey, I have not just health that I have to worry about, but I also have stress. And if they get stressed out, then things can happen. And, you know, you have to worry about all this RNG. I think that's really cool. And the way that they implemented it in the game, I think worked really well. Granted, that's not how everyone sees it, but I think it's a lot better than a lot of others that we see who, you know, kind of play to that style of game, where you have this idea of, you know, we're going to give you a super tough game and we're going to make it so that, you know, you need to learn the game to get good at it, but still throw a curveball late game here or there that's going to really throw you off. And I think, you know, not many do it very well, but Darkest Dungeon does do it very
that's like
well.
that's a big part of what I like in general about roguelikes. I'm kind of a big roguelike fan, because those kinds of games really largely fit in with what I enjoy about video games. Those games are about, you know, get better at the game so you can go further. And like, you know, the unique thing about roguelikes is that, like, you know, they give you little bonuses towards it, and like obviously Rogue Legacy for me is kind of the best version of this, because, you know, you can go into the dungeon, get as far as you can, and then you know, once you die, you can use the money you earned in that life to unlock upgrades and make it easier to survive. But, like, you know, the thing that drives you to keep going in is like, oh, now I've got this upgrade, maybe I can survive longer. But in doing that, you kind of push yourself to get better at the game. And most roguelikes manage to do something similar, where, you know, you're the thing that's motivating you more than anything is the idea that, oh, I can get these things that'll make me stronger. But in doing that, you're actually getting stronger.
Yeah. And I think that it's also like, you're not just getting stronger, you're getting better.
Yes, exactly.
And it's one of the things where, you know, we're lost on this idea of, like, in stuff like, you know, we're all focused, if we're playing a game that has upgrades, we're focused on getting the upgrades, making it easier to beat the game.
Yeah.
It's, let's make it as easy as possible. And when you look at something like a roguelike game that does give you those upgrades, but you actually have to play through the game before you can even get those upgrades, that is unique, and it plays to the style of get good at the game. And I think a lot of people kind of miss that when they're playing through a lot of roguelikes. Like, they don't see it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, you kind of lose something when you don't play it like that. I know people who play it, you know, I'm playing a roguelike, if I die, I lose everything, so I'm not going to die. That's not the way you're supposed to play a roguelike.
No, and not at all. You're supposed to, you know, use that life to learn, okay, how can I survive longer next time?
Yeah. And
your goal with each life is to learn the mechanics of the game and get better at it.
Yeah. And I think if you play to that idea, you have a better chance at, you know, actually getting good at the game, right?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people, that's their goal, is like, let me beat the game. And that's how you do it, but they don't go about it in the right way. So I think
they don't have the right mindset.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of one of those ideas that is, it's hard to get across in a game, but when you do, it works.
Yeah, I can agree with that one.
All right. You want to talk about your next game that you really enjoyed, or? Yeah.
So the game that's been that was my favorite for the longest time, before Monster Hunter World came out, and I got really into Monster Hunter, and it swept me off my feet. My favorite game was Skyrim, and I know that's kind of it's kind of a difficult
cookie
thing.
cutter answer.
What's
that?
A
little bit. A cookie cutter answer, almost.
Well, well, you could say it's cookie cutter because it is a very popular game, but also, like,
yeah,
a lot of people, you know, especially with the way Bethesda's been lately, they've been looking, you know, Bethesda had for a long time kind of what I think of as the Zelda status, which is to say, like, every Zelda's amazing because the first Zelda's amazing.
Yeah, I can see
and people are unwilling to look at it critically because, you know, it's a Zelda game. And I think people did that with Bethesda for a long time, and, you know, everyone was saying Skyrim was amazing, but in more recent times, people are looking at Skyrim more critically and saying, this game is imperfect. And I recognize a lot of those impurities, and I recognize its imperfections, and I still absolutely love that game.
I think, I'm right there with you. I think, you know, a lot of people can make the meme, oh, what's the next system they're gonna port Skyrim to, right?
Yeah.
But I think that because we're making those jokes, it actually talks about that point really well. It's like, you want to know the reason that they're porting it to so many systems is because it's a good game.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people don't realize that when they're kind of going into the mindset of like, oh, what makes this game so good? It's like the fact that you are intrigued enough to say, like, hey, they're going to bring Skyrim to a new system. Like, there's a reason they're doing it, and it's because they want to give as wide a breadth of, like, you know, we're going to give as many people the option to play this game as possible, and here's how we're doing it.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
And because it's such a good game, they are allowed to do that without too much ridicule.
Yeah, 100%. But then, like, you get to that point where you feel like maybe they've pushed it too far with all the ports, and that's why people are now looking at it more critically, which I think is a good thing, because, you know, the goal is that it then pushes them to do better with their next installment. But, like, what I was trying to say with all that was that, like, you know, I recognize that saying Skyrim is my favorite thing, is one of my favorite games, is you know, people are looking at it more critically. People are saying this game is actually not that good, and I still love it. I recognize everything that's wrong with it, and I still love it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we'll probably talk about more as we develop this series. Is like, we love these games, but we realize there are flaws with them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, because no game is going to be perfect. It's just, that's the way, you know, I am going into computer science. I'm doing a concentration in game development. There's no way to make a perfect game. It's even hard just to make a good game because there's so much that you have to deal with. There's art, story, gameplay. The coding aspect of it is just insane. So I think when people start to get to that point where they start to recognize the flaws, that's when they actually realize how good that game is.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that, you know, it kind of gets lost on people, but I think is still something that we as a gaming community should realize.
Yeah, I can agree with that one. And definitely 100%. But like, that's, like you were saying, that's kind of something we will talk about more at a different time. But like, I'll just continue with you know, kind of where I got started with Skyrim, and I just wanted to acknowledge right off the bat that, you know, I know this game is imperfect. I know there's a lot of problems with it.
And I mean, that's something that we should do.
Yeah.
It's
but when let's see, when I was, I want to say 14 years old, I played Skyrim for the first time, and by that point I want to say it had already been out for a couple years. Let's see, how old was I when Skyrim came out? It would have been 2011, so I was... math is hard.
Yeah, it is.
I want to say Skyrim I want to say Skyrim had been out for about 2 years by the time I picked it up. As I said earlier, I really did not play video games when I was younger, when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I picked up gaming when Minecraft got big. Believe it or not.
Okay, yep. All right.
And so I want to say Skyrim was like the 8th game on my Steam library or something like that. It wasn't something I had been playing for a really long time. And it wasn't something I hadn't been playing video games that much, so I didn't have a very critical eye, and even then I was younger. You know, when you're younger, everything's fun.
You're just like, oh, this is a cool game. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, being someone who hadn't played a lot of video games growing up, Skyrim was, it blew my mind. You know, I walked into this world, and, you know, the closest I'd played to an RPG at that time had been WoW. I played World of Warcraft when I was a little younger. But it was just like, I walked into this world, and they gave me a sword, and I started swinging it at enemies, and I was like, this game is the coolest thing ever! And then they started throwing dragons at you, and there were trolls, and there was... Oh, it was the coolest, and I had so much fun with it. And the thing that I love so much about that game, you know, that game does not have so much, you know, the skill-based gameplay that, you know, Monster Hunter has. It has it to a certain extent, but a lot of the game is, you know, press the mouse button and you'll swing your sword. If you want to add some strategy to it, you can start carrying either a shield or a two-handed weapon, and you can block. If you want to get really good,
magic. And,
if you want to get really good, you can start adding magic. But when I first played it, I played with a two-handed weapon because I didn't understand blocking. I thought magic was too much of a pain to switch between, so I went in and I was like, I'm gonna fucking cut down whoever's in my way. So the thing that kept me locked into that game was not so much the gameplay. It was, you know, there was this world full of characters and you know, you talk to each character, and maybe they don't have the most interesting story, but they'll give you a side quest, and you go to the side quest and you go through this dungeon and you get to kill shit, which is the most fun part.
Yeah.
That game had such, you know, it had such a fascinating world to me. I really enjoyed going to all the towns and spending time with the people, and then you got involved. I mean, the thing that I loved about Skyrim, you know, Skyrim was, as I mentioned, one of my first RPGs. I mostly played linear games or puzzle games. So, you know, when I walked into Riften, in the middle of the story, looking for this old dude to help me kill some dragons or whatever, this guy walks up to me and he's like, "Hey, want to help me steal some stuff?" I'm like, "Heck yeah, on that one, let's do it." And he helps me steal some stuff, and all of a sudden, I'm roped into this underground network of thieves, or also known as the Thieves Guild. Yeah. And you know, it didn't register to me at first that being in the Thieves Guild was off the beaten path. It wasn't part of the storyline. It was its own separate thing. I thought I was just playing the game the way it was meant to be played. But you know, yeah. I play through the Thieves Guild long enough, and I realize none of this has anything to do with anything I've been doing. And I realize, and I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the two things that I love about Skyrim so much is the worlds that it's set in and your ability to be distracted by it. The big joke that everybody talks about with Skyrim, the big meme, is that, you know, if you go into Skyrim and you play the game, there's no way in hell you're gonna get from the start to the end without finishing a side quest in the middle.
Yeah.
Because the game is gonna distract you in some way, and I think that's incredible.
And I think it also shows like a form of world building that I think prior to it hadn't really been seen.
Yeah.
You had this like you were saying, the Thieves Guild, and you have all of these different, like, when I first played through it, I accidentally got roped into like becoming a vampire and the Black Hand and these weird storylines, and I was always like, I'm so confused about where I am and where I'm supposed to be, that I don't know what to do, and I just kept following these side quests, and I'm like, I know that at some point I was going towards this next main quest. I don't remember what it was called or whatever, but I think that like that immersion factor is something that, you know, we get it sometimes in these games. I'm sure Red Dead Redemption has it. The one that I will always point out for that immersion factor is, for me at least, is Fallout New Vegas.
New Vegas is good at that as well.
That was my game of like, wow, look at all this stuff that I can do. Like, there was so much cool thing. There were so many cool things. I was like, I can't wait to like actually get into this world and everything. And it's like, I'm actually playing a game that encourages me not to follow the main path.
Yeah. This big story that they presumably put a lot of thought into, put a lot of work into, they don't want you to focus on it. There's no part in the game where they're like, hey, maybe you should go back to the main storyline real quick. They're just like, you do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, and that's actually probably the best merger of what you and I believe as, you know, like what our type of game is, I think.
Yeah.
I think for now, of all the games that we have, like throughout, you know, all the history of video gaming and everything, I think that one kind of pinpoints that combination of learning to play the game as you go and story elements. And it's not just the main story, it's those side quests and stuff. I think that marries pretty well in that game. Yeah, there are some problems. But I think that one is probably where you and I would find probably the most overall consensus of this is a good game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that big time, because, you know, it doesn't have a fantastic story. It doesn't have the best gameplay, but it does both of them well to a certain
Good.
degree.
Yeah. So now I'm going to talk about a recent game that has been really huge for me. Like, I've already talked with you about this quite a bit. I'm sure you're probably tired of hearing about it.
I know exactly where this is going.
But boy, oh, fucking Persona 5 has, and I realized that Persona 5 came out last year, and that, you know, I get it. It falls into, hey, this is my type of game. It's a story-based game. It's a JRPG.
Here's the thing, though, is that, like, I think this is a great game for us to talk about because I've been going on this entire time about how I'm not into JRPGs, how I'm not into story, how I prefer gameplay overall. But I love Persona 5.
Yeah.
Persona 5 is, like, the only JRPG outside of Pokemon that I've played in recent time and gotten really into, even though I haven't finished it. So I think this is a perfect game for us to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and one of the things that I will put forth that I think will probably affect me more than it will affect you overall. Because when we actually started talking about playing the game, I remember you had talked about a lot about mementos. And if you have never played Persona 5, essentially, or any of the Persona series, and I don't know, because this is my first introduction to the Persona series. I'd heard about it before, but I was never really into it, but I heard really good reviews about this game, and I started playing it, and I started loving it. I think that this also is a pretty good game that marries both your and my versions of gaming, is the free time aspect of games. You don't have a lot of games that utilize it very well. It's either,
I agree with that 100%.
Here's a sandbox world, do whatever the fuck you want, or here's a story, follow it to the T.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we're starting to get more of the, you know, kind of an intermix between the two, especially with how popular Skyrim was and how popular Red Dead is. And, you know, I haven't played God of War yet. I have it, you know, sitting over in my room being ready to play, but I gotta play through Persona 5 a second time and catch all the niche details and all that kind of stuff. But we have an idea of, you know, what does the game do, and when you have something that takes you on a particular story like Persona 5 does, but almost every day it's really bogged down at the beginning with tutorials on, like, here's everything that you can do throughout the game. Once it actually opens you up in between the palaces, which are the main dungeons of the game, you have a little bit of time where it's like, oh, you have to meet up with your team every single day to, like, discuss who's the next target, stuff like that. And that's where the story is kind of set in stone. You have this free time, and you have essentially 2 blocks every day. A like after school / daytime block, and then an evening block. And as you progress through the game, more of the areas open up. But I was really into, you know, making the bonds with the different characters, getting to know their backstory, you know, going through their, you know, essentially personal life that they share with the main character. Whereas you decided to take the free time dungeon mementos, and that was your playground, really. And you know, I went through mementos every time I finished a palace. I opened up as much as I could. I went through it, and there are some things, you know, you have to keep going back to mementos and stuff like that. But I think that allowing the player to choose what type of game that they're going to be playing is something wildly different than what we've seen.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So, like, you know, that's my take on the subject. Like I like I said, I really enjoyed the game. I think it was, you know, well made. It was crafted in such a way that it really touched on my idea of what a JRPG should be. Because, you know, you get these characters, and it was also a weird thing because it felt like a regular JRPG like Final Fantasy mixed with Pokemon in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
Which was really cool because it's like, oh, I'm just playing another Final Fantasy clone as a lot of people kind of see JRPGs nowadays, which is a little upsetting because I think that, JRPGs can be more than that.
Yeah.
But that idea of like, wait, I can like collect new powers and stuff like that. It's not like a static character. That's super cool.
That's to me what made that game so good, and what made it kind of mingle well with my idea of skill over story, because like one of my favorite things about that game is like walking into a palace or walking into Mementos, and like my personal arsenal of personas is so well built that there's no enemy that I can't just immediately be like, oh, here's your weakness.
And I'll give you kind of, and I think you'll see it eventually. So when you do a new game plus, you actually save your Persona Compendium. So you can just, at level 1, I'm gonna summon all my strong late game personas, right? Going through New Game Plus like that, it's like, well, I can do this, but, I also have all the late game equipment and all of this late game stuff that, I don't technically need, but it's going to make it go faster so I can get to the part that I actually care about.
Which for you would be the story, yeah?
Yeah,
or like
exactly.
the character interaction.
But I mean, I still found a lot of, I guess you could call it merit in Mementos, because I thought Mementos was a good way of doing that side of the story. There's a lot of things hidden in Mementos that you don't quite see if you were to just do the character interactions. So I think that's one of the things, but there's also an object in Mementos. There's also this idea that in Mementos, to unlock everything, you also need to unlock everyone's story.
Okay.
Which I think, it's... I use the term the marriage of these two ideas a lot this episode, and, it probably won't continue, hopefully. But it really does show in that game where, if I really want to unlock every bit of the game possible, which I am a completionist, so of course I'm going to get 100%. Like, eventually I will have that platinum trophy. But I actually have to do both sides. I have to get my, my social interactions up with every single person, and I have to go through Mementos and just dig and grind and, really work my way through all of that. And I think that is another thing that we kind of lose sight on, is the completionist area of the gaming community, because it's a very small, like, if we think of the gaming community as a whole, you have the battle royales, the MOBAs, the MMOs. There's a lot of games out there for the completionist in us, but there's not a lot of games for the completionist that like doing things.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Because it's either an MMO where it's constantly changing. There's absolutely no way you're getting 100% in that game. That's just impossible. Or it's, you're just going to follow this path, and once you're done with this path, that's 100%. You didn't need to find anything.
Yeah.
So I think, that one does do something that some of our other games that we have out right now don't. And I think that that's really enjoyable, so...
Yeah, I can agree with that. My big thing with Persona 5 is that, like, for me, and like this kind of goes along with what you were saying before about how we can't consider every JRPG to be a Final Fantasy clone. To me, a good JRPG should offer something different.
Yes.
And that's a really hard thing to do. It's difficult to say that every game needs to reinvent the wheel and have its own crazy unique system. And you know, it's kind of unfair to ask that, but at the same time, the games that do it are the ones that we love, you know.
And I don't think it's even necessarily that they need to reinvent the wheel, like, because if you go back to the game that I said was my favorite game of all time, Wild Arms, it didn't reinvent the wheel. It took the turn-based.
It took the wheel and improved it.
It gave it, you know, it gave it spinners in a way, like, you know, it made it look cool, it made it flashier, but then it also, you know, it improved the treads, or however you want to say that, like, the wheel was improved in that way, because, you know, the force gauge was so interesting. And it had another thing that, you know, in a lot of JRPGs, it was, you had an overworld that you walked through. Sometimes you walked into a town and you walked through the town, and then random encounters and then turns. What Wild Arms did that not a lot of others did at the time was you had tools in the overworld that you had to use to complete dungeons. And, you know, it was attached to a certain character, so you had to switch off to that character, walk around as them, use their tool and stuff. So you kind of had this kind of dichotomy of, maybe I don't need to reinvent the wheel, but I should at least make it new,
push the limits of it.
Yeah, which I think Persona does well, in a way that it kind of takes Pokemon and Final Fantasy, pushes them together. You get that aspect, but then also the other aspects of, you know, choose how you're going to play the game. So
yeah, that's pretty much where I was going with that. Was like the big thing that for me was so interesting about it was, like, you know, the Persona system is not so different from collecting Pokemon, as you were just saying.
yeah,
But it added this extra element to the game that made it so much more enjoyable for me as somebody who doesn't like the whole, you know, walk into battle, take hits, end battle. Oh good, I have to use some items to heal now because I had no way to avoid damage. The thing that I love so much about Persona is that your ability to understand the game, your ability to get better at the game, lends itself to
knowing your strengths and weaknesses.
well, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Like the fact that you can, you know, the fact that you can end a battle right off the bat just by using, like, that Persona's weakness.
Yeah.
And, like, you can avoid, like, the thing that I dislike the most about JRPGs is that, like, you just kind of have to take the hits. I like games like Monster Hunter because I don't have to take the hits if I get better. And Persona kind of gave me that same feeling because, like, my knowledge of the game gave me the ability to increase my Persona arsenal so that walking into a battle, I didn't have to take the hit because I knew how to stop it. You know what I mean?
And I think, and you'll probably see this when you go back to it, and in the later game, like, you know, every Persona has a strength and a weakness, and there are even some Personas that if you use a certain, like, if you use an ice ability, it'll heal them instead.
Yeah.
Or if you use a gunfire, it'll actually reflect the damage back at you. So, like, that idea as well is, like, you know, maybe I do have to technically take hits, but I myself am not going to be taking damage because I have the Persona equipped that makes it so I don't take that damage. And I think that is another aspect of that game that it does well, because, you know, with Pokemon, it's just, oh, once you memorize the table of, like, oh, this is good against this, it's easy. But with Persona, you can actually look at each one's, like, arsenal and be like, oh, this is going to do me really well in this situation because I don't have to worry about this.
Exactly, yeah. That's to me, like, the big thing that the reason that I ended up enjoying, or I have enjoyed Persona 5 at all, considering it's a JRPG. Like, I literally never play JRPGs, and I really enjoy that game. And the reason for that is that, like, in a way, like, it is skill based because, like, my learning of the game makes it easier for me.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like, oh, I have to go grind some more because I'm not strong enough for this. Instead, it can often come down to, oh, good, I have the persona that makes me strong against this, making it easier for me.
Absolutely.
So that's for me why Persona 5 is so good.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know. Is it my turn to talk about a game I played?
Yeah,
recently?
it's your turn because I think you still have your 2 recent games. I have one more, and then we'll talk a little bit about like how we'll go moving on. So if you want to talk about your next game, a more recent game that you've been playing that you're really enjoying, maybe not top tier status, but that you actually do enjoy.
Yeah. I have a decent one for this. Another thing that you'll come to find about me is I'm not big on first person shooters.
Okay.
Especially like I just like Call of Duty, Battlefield, all that crap. I'm not interested. It's not fun for me.
I'm right there with you. I'm gonna be completely honest, kind of interject. Like, I am not a big first-person shooter guy. Like, I think it might just be because I don't have the like reaction time that I need. But it's not as fun for me as other games are.
Yeah. So every once in a blue moon, I'll find that an FPS that I actually do really enjoy. Like when Overwatch first came out, I got really into that game. And like the thing you'll learn about me is, number one, I hate playing against other players because I'm not usually very good at games.
Same.
And
I know that feeling.
yeah, and I'm not good at playing video games for the most part. And and I'm just not that good at first person shooters. So it was weird for me to get really into Overwatch and to like play competitive and like get like gold or whatever I ended up with on competitive, like for me to play competitive in the first place and then for me to do like relatively well in it. But like it's not the point being, I'm not talking about Overwatch today, but like the point being, I don't often play FPSs. But recently my friend gifted me Doom, the Doom remake from 2016. Okay. And I've been really enjoying that game. That game, the point of the game is pretty simple, and they even like they made a kind of a point in that game to make it like obvious that like this is the point of the game. You shoot shit.
Yeah, exactly.
And like they literally like the first part of the game, they have like the main guy, I don't remember what his name, like he's like Space Marine or some shit like that. The guy he was trying to talk to him was like trying to like give exposition, and like he just pushed the screen away. And that was the game developer's way of showing like we're not about the story here, we're about like making the game that you like.
Absolutely.
And so like Doom as an FPS is a game that I enjoy largely because you don't focus on the story, they focus on this is the shooting part. And like despite the fact that like a lot of the guns are like your normal average gun, you have a pistol, you have an assault rifle, you have a shotgun. They added mods to they added like a mod system to every gun, so you can choose like a special ability for each gun. Like with my shotgun, I can shoot at like an explosive grenade every now and then. So I've really been enjoying that game because my arsenal of weaponry is constantly growing, and along with it, my ability to deal with every situation changes. I might walk up to a big demon, and like at the beginning of this game, I would have said, "Fuck me, I have a pistol and I'm screwed." But now I can look at it and say, "Excuse me, I've got this shotgun that shoots grenades. I've got this assault rifle that shoots missiles. I've got this plasma rifle that builds up heat and then can blow that heat out, and it hurts."
Yeah.
So that's a game I've really been enjoying, despite the fact that it's an FPS, because it is largely based on like you walk into a situation, you're like, all right, how can I deal with all of these demons without like dying?
Mm-hmm.
And also it's got a strong focus on gameplay, and it brings it. They intentionally, when they made that game, they focused heavily on like making it more like the old Doom games. Like you can rocket jump. There's a double jump. You move really fast, which I think is awesome.
I also think that, and this is kind of my take on the whole idea of Doom and you know, first person shooters in a whole is like you have two versions of first person shooters. You have the Call of Duty Battlefield version of the first person shooter where it's, you know, you're up against real players, you have to be good at the game and everything. But I believe there's something to be said about, you know, there are first person shooters that don't have that multiplayer. I believe Gears of War would be a good, you know, kind of idea of that. You have Gears of War, but to your point, you have these upgrades and you're focused on the gameplay and everything, whereas that's not something, you know, the FPSs of now do.
Yeah.
It's either competitive multiplayer or it's heavy story. So that's kind of like, you know, the halfway point of it's not multiplayer, but it's not story.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I also had an interaction with a game that, you know, it wouldn't be like me to play. And that's both PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Call of Duty Blackout, the newest Call of Duty game. And it's because it's not a typical FPS. It's something you have to go and, you know, find your items, and you have to, you know, be good at shooting, but you don't have to worry about, you know, it's a firefight constantly. It's like, you know, you have these intermittent, like, oh, I have to, you know, get in a firefight, but in between that, it's, you know, I have to get all of my supplies together. I have to make sure I'm fully stacked in ammo and stuff like that. And I think, you know, it's not exactly the same, but it at least plays to that idea of it's not a typical FPS.
Yeah. I would say, like, I'm really impressed by Doom for being successful and not being a realistic multiplayer FPS. That's not common anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, you know, going along with your idea that, or with your thought about like two different kinds of FPSs, I'd say there's another school of thought for the two different kinds of FPS line. There's Call of Duty and there's Battlefield, and there's all these games that are realistic FPS.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Doom, you have Destiny, you have Overwatch, that are unrealistic. That you know, maybe you like even if they use more like normal weaponry, like Destiny uses just, you know, like pistols and sniper rifles and assault rifles, and Doom 2 has that as well. It's pistols and assault rifles and shotguns, but it still manages to take those normal guns and make an interesting and different and unrealistic game out of it.
And another one that does that, I think, is Warframe does that pretty well, I think. Because Warframe is kind of similar to Destiny, but on top of having, you know, these guns, you know, more realistic guns that, you know, they made unique and stuff, you also had the frames themselves, the Warframes themselves, which had their own unique abilities and stuff, and, you know, it kind of mixed that idea of, you know, you have your guns, they're realistic to a degree, but it's also unique, and it plays off of a type of FPS that, you know, isn't your typical Call of Duty. So I think you're right about that. There's something to be said about, you know, those non Call of Duty Battlefield games that I think kind of get overlooked by players like you and me who aren't big first person shooters.
Yeah. I'd say definitely with like Doom, Destiny 2 was a game that I played pretty recently. Both of those games kind of had me like more interested in FPS as a whole recently.
Yeah.
Which is like a really cool thing for a game to do.
But I mean, I think and I would say that that's probably something that all FP or all video games should do is, yeah, it should, give the people who are playing the game, like who play that type of game, satisfaction, but it should also, intrigue people that maybe don't normally play that style of game. And I think if you do that, that's another very good thing.
Yeah. I can agree with that one.
So, now and I do technically have one more past this, but I'll just leave it for an honorable mention. I'll actually, do the honorable mention right now. And the reason why I'm not going to talk about this game is it kind of hit on not all of the same points that we talked about with Persona, but it talked on some of them where it's, a unique style and it does something different than the form that it's used to, is Octopath Traveler. Octopath Traveler really actually reminded me of the original Wild Arms, because you played through each character's original story and then you gathered all the characters up and then you played through, the full story as it is. And I have not beaten that game. I'm nowhere close to beating that game, but I think it does that, which is, the typical, or what I think is the unique idea of the prologue and the stories. But there's also in that game the idea of multi-classing in a different way than what you would normally see multi-classing being. Like a typical game, if you're multi-classing, like let's say you want your fighter to also be like a healer, then you're locked into a fighter healer. Whereas with Octopath Traveler, you can actually, switch up. Like once you have the items that allow you to do multi-classing, you can, interchange those. As like, oh, I want this person to be a hunter merchant, and I want this person to be a mage cleric. Okay, now I have to switch it around because I'm switching out my party and stuff. So I think that one is a more unique version of a regular JRPG.
I gotcha.
So my final game here, and I've actually kind of been playing this intermittently as we're talking, and while I was waiting for you and your technical difficulties, is Slay the Spire. Now, Slay the Spire is a deck building roguelike. It's kind of hard to pin it down into a specific genre, because it's roguelike because, if you die, you restart and you have to, play through it again. And you can get bonuses for playing through it multiple times and stuff like that. It's a deck builder because as you go throughout the game, you add cards to your deck and you play with the cards in your deck. And, like, you draw 5 cards, you play as many as you have energy for, and then you end the turn, and then stuff like that. But I think Slay the Spire is really interesting because and this is a game that's still in beta, which is something that we haven't talked about yet, but we probably will.
Oh, definitely.
Future episodes, I think. The idea of what you should be looking for in a beta game would probably be a good topic for a lot later down the road. But I think Slay the Spire, one, it's constantly giving you information that's updating. So it's getting close to the full release, actually. They have finally, given you the end game tasks. All of the animations and art are being finalized, and it's looking to, push into its final release. But it does something where you have 3 acts that you have to play through, and each one is, you play through, you follow a path and you choose branching paths and which one you go through, and you add cards and you get these things called relics, and each relic will do something different.
Would you say they're ancient relics?
Oh my gosh. You should have known it was going to come up. But some of them look like they could be. But, and then you have different types of cards. You have your attack cards, your skill cards, your power cards, and your curse cards. And each one will do something different. And you know, you have your health and you have how much damage you do, but you also have, you know, if you can see what the enemy's going to do, so you can like, oh, I need to block for this much damage, so I can do that. And it gives you all the information that you really need right up front. There's no real tutorial or anything. It gives you all the information, but it also allows you to grow as a player, because it's like, oh, I can always, you know, give up a little bit of health because I can regen it later, or I can, you know, pass up this relic because I'm not going into that style of deck, or, you know, I need to change on the fly because, you know, I'm only given 3 cards to choose from after every battle, and I have to, you know, build my deck, and I want to keep my deck small, or do I want to make my deck big? And, you know, you have these different options. So I think Slay the Spire is such a unique game where it has multiple genres that it can fall under, and it also has, you know, a lot of replayability. If you beat the game once, it unlocks Ascension mode for that character, and there's 3 characters, and you can unlock Ascension mode, and then you can, you know, play through Ascension mode, and there's 20 different levels, and, you know, it's constantly amping up the difficulty. It's like, it's constantly throwing you, like, you know, here, have a wrench this time. That now I've learned to dodge the wrench. Well, now I'm going to throw a piano at you. And you gotta learn how to play around the game as it's constantly getting harder. And I love that style that Slay the Spire has. And also, I think one of the things that we're probably not going to talk a lot about on this podcast, but I think that the actual art and visual language of the game is really, really nice. I think it's nice and simple. It's pretty colorful. I know a lot of people really enjoy like, you know, the quirkiness of the game's like visual representation, and then also, you know, just each of the bosses is so unique. And when you get that idea of like, every single time I play, I'm gonna get a different boss, or I'm gonna get a different, you know, style of like map or something like that. Like, that is super cool. And each of the 3 characters has multiple different types of decks you can build with all of their cards and all of their relics and stuff like that. I think that culmination of all these different ideas, and it seems like a lot when I'm talking, but when you actually see it like actually played out, it works really
well. I imagine it kind of eases you in and doesn't give you all the information at once.
Well, no, it won't. Like, it'll show you the difference between your skill cards and your attack cards, and what blocking does and everything. But it at least gives you the information of like, you have a deck, build your deck, fight the creatures.
I gotcha.
So it's like, here is all the information in the most simplest way we can give it. You get to learn the intricacies of it. It's kind of like if I were to show you a Rubik's Cube, and it starts out like a simple, like the first time you play through Slay the Spire, it's going to give you a 3x3 Rubik's Cube. But then the next time you play through the Slay the Spire, that Rubik's Cube is going to change into a 4x4. It's going to get more complex. And it's going to keep adding these layers to it that, like, oh, what does this card do, or what does this relic do? How can I play these 2 cards off of each other? Stuff like that. There's a lot of that type of thing. And another thing that it does is it gives you, if you go, I believe, into the compendium, no, not the compendium. If you go into your statistics, you can actually see your all of the achievements, and it tells you what all the achievements are right off the bat. Well, most of them right off the bat.
Okay.
But if you actually read it, you can be like, oh, that's a different way of playing with that character, or that's a different deck that I didn't think about before.
I gotcha.
So, you know, it gives you that idea where, like, here, have a little bit of information right now, but I'm not going to give you everything. You actually have to work for it. And also, there's the unlocking system where, as you know, in the early, like, you don't have all the cards and relics unlocked right at the beginning.
Of course.
You will get those as you play through each of the characters, and each of the characters have 5 unlocks, and you know you build up your full repertoire. So that is something that like I'm pretty So I actually have 2. It's actually really funny. I've played through this game so many times, but there are 2 relics. Apparently they can only be obtained through events, but they're 2 relics that I have yet to see. And like I'm still playing through the game, and I'm like, I want to see what these relics do. I want to know how to get them and stuff like that. But it's just like, you have to play through the game, and you have to interact with all these different things. You have to try different, combinations and methods. So that's, I think, one of the things that it does really well.
I gotcha. I want to play that game. I do own it. I bought it a while ago, and I just haven't played it yet. That game does look really cool.
I think it'll play into your idea of like, hey.
Well, that's it's another one of those games that's like, I'm not big on strategy, I'm not big on turn-based, but I think I'm gonna like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you will too, and it's mostly because of the way that you play games. Is you're always looking for ways to improve.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. I sort of forgot what game I was going to talk about. I definitely had one. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about fuck, it's totally gone, man.
Oh no.
What even have I been playing recently? I haven't played too much all that recently. You know what I will talk about? I'll talk about House Flipper. How about? House Flipper is a pretty interesting game. It's a simulation game where you flip a house.
Okay.
And I do enjoy that. I do enjoy simulation games, probably more than your average person, just because I think it's interesting to see how something that can seem very mundane or very just not fun can become fun in the context of a video game. House flipping probably sucks. There's a lot of really gross houses. You have to do all the cleaning and all the rebuilding manually. It's probably a very unpleasant thing. But in a video game, I'm just pressing the mouse button while I fucking sweep up this mess, or while I vacuum up these cockroaches. I'm not actually in that place. I'm not actually doing that thing, which makes it fun, despite the fact that the game is trying to make you experience that. Do you see what I mean? Like the game's goal is to make you experience that, and yet it's fun because you aren't experiencing that.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. Is where you're like, simulation games have always had kind of an interesting, place in the video game world, because there are a lot of people who are like, well, that isn't a real game. Like, exactly.
Like a lot of people are like, why would you want to play a game about like mowing the lawn or something like that?
And you also see it kind of in your stuff like, Farming Simulator and all of those types of games. And it's like, I have this idea that it's, this game is supposed to be for this and this alone. And I will always, follow this. And like, I've heard people say like, what do, farmers think about Farming Sim? What do, truck drivers think about Euro Truck Sim and stuff like that? And it's like, you actually get a lot of really cool responses where people are, like, yeah, I actually really enjoy this game. This game is really cool and stuff like that. So
yeah,
you have a weird, I guess, area in gaming that kind of the simulator games fall into. I don't play very many sim games, to be honest, but I understand the appeal of them.
I gotcha.
I guess I should say.
I think like it just kind of lends it kind of goes along with what I was just saying. A big part of it is you take the fun parts of that thing and cut out like the annoying parts or the bad parts completely. Like using Euro Truck as an example, like I've thought about it in the past. I've thought about like, man, if everything in my life goes horribly wrong, I wouldn't mind being a truck driver. But then I actually think about it for a second, and it's like you're away from home for possibly days at a time, and the entire time you're fucking sitting in a car seat. You know, when I make an hour and a half long drive down to the summer camp that we both used to work for every year, like my ass starts to hurt during that hour and a half.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, yeah, it probably would be pretty cool to, you know, be driving around nonstop, hauling all this product or whatever. But holy shit, would my ass hurt?
Yeah, like I don't know if I'd really want to do that.
Exactly. So then you take a game like Euro Truck Simulator, and like not only does it cut out the long part of the drive, like the longest drives in that game take an hour at best, I'd say. And you completely cut out, like, you know, I don't have to worry about how much money I'm actually making because it's a video game. It's not like it's going to actually affect anything. Or I don't have to worry about the fact that I've been sitting down for hours. I don't got to worry about exercising because I sit down every day. You don't have to worry about your ass hurting, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why House Flipper is fun. You know, you don't actually have to demolish a house. You don't actually have to clean up cockroaches. You don't actually have to paint every wall in a house. You're just simulating it. So you cut out the not fun part, and all you get to enjoy is the, oh, I designed a new house kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to actually look at it. I think, you know, we kind of have this idea of...
You have an idea of what it's going to be like without actually having done it.
Exactly. And I think that there's also, I would say that there's something to be said of, you know, what actually is, you know, we have this idea of like, what is a video game? Because there have been a lot of things that people say are video games, but we're like, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
That doesn't, which, and I understand that, like, people have their opinions on, you know, what makes video, like,
what makes a fun video game, what makes a game a game.
Yeah, like, and I think we kind of have an idea of, you know, hey, this is what I think a video game is, right? Like, I think that a video game is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And then someone can come to you and say, like, well, I think a video game is, you know, I agree with your X and Y points, but I think your Z should be this or that. And I think that's actually why we have such a wide array of video games. One of the games that I didn't talk about here, and I feel like, and you've known me long enough to know that I like this game.
I'm surprised you didn't talk about it, honestly.
And I am too, now that I think about it, because it probably fits better in my favorite game of all time than Darkest Dungeon. Yeah. I would say that they're probably tied, because they're two very different types of games. But I think, you know, and I'm going to sound like a giant fucking weeb for saying this, but I really, really enjoyed Danganronpa. Granted, I only played the first one. I knew about a lot of the major twists before going into the game, but it was still a game where I could sit down and I say, like, wow, this is really good. Like, no, what a great game this was. And I think that it's kind of weird to think that, you know, my idea of a good game is Danganronpa, but someone else would be like, oh, you know, who cares about graphic novels? They're not really games. You're just reading a story. But
yep, that's
you
me.
know,
I'm right there. That's me.
We
already know, like, I tried to play the game and it didn't work with me.
It didn't work, yeah. But I mean, there's also, you know, there is a market for that type of games, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people kind of put to the wayside, unfortunately, because, you know, oh, that's not a real game, or that kind of stuff, you know, gets told to us, and, you know, we accept it when we're young. But when we actually think about it and we actually play the games, we're like, I don't know why this guy didn't like this game. Well, it's because he had a different experience with it.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that, you know, having you and me talk about these sort of things where we both are very different in what we think makes good games and what is, you know, what is acceptable practice in, you know, this not community, in this format, it makes it really weird that we would be so like agreeable in a sense like this. I know that we're definitely going to have episodes where we're both like, I just don't agree with you. I think that this was a horrible representation of this game, or I think that, you know, they did a really bad job with this. But I think that having that room for conversation is a lot better than us just sticking with ourselves and being like, this is my game, I only like this type of game, nobody else can change that.
Right, yeah.
And I think, like, if we can, if you and I can have a discussion like this, and, you know, I think that really shows that, like, games are so unique.
100%. It's such a, there's no other format like it.
Yeah, I think that should be kind of it should set a sort of precedent for us to say, like, we know we're going to come into some of these conversations with differing opinions. We'll talk through them and see, you know, I think this game did this very well, whereas I don't think this game did it that well at all, and stuff like that. So I think if we come into it with that kind of mindset, and our listeners do as well, like, we're going to see so much information come forward where we can actually talk about, hey, you know, maybe this game wasn't as bad as we thought, or maybe this interpretation of it wasn't as bad as we thought, because we just saw it differently.
Yeah, for sure.
So that being said, we can actually kind of talk about, you know, where we're going to go from, you know, this point forward, because, you know, we had a lot of good conversations in this. It kind of gave, you know, the listeners an idea of where each of us are coming from. So I think, you know, you and me will probably, for, you know, at least the beginning, decide what the next episode's topic will be. But maybe in the future episodes we can, you know, get questions from the listeners, or they can pitch ideas for what our next episode should be. But if we want to kind of come up with what is next episode going to be centered around, so that we both have time to, you know, look at games that work with that, whether it be a genre or a certain mechanic that we think is really good.
Sure.
I didn't have too many ideas coming into this because I was kind of, you know, I had other things that I had to focus on throughout the week, and there's you know, a bunch of things that we still need to, you know, talk through about how, like, you know, when we're going to do this and everything. But, like, I think if we start with, you know, if we start with genres, we'll at least give ourselves a little bit of room before we move into the actual, hey, we're going to talk about this mechanic, and we're going to talk about why it's good or why it doesn't work. So if you have a genre that you would like to, you know, go into, let's kind of talk about it from there.
Okay, that sounds good. I don't have any ideas off the top of my head. I don't know if you do.
Well, I mean, let's do something, because I think we both kind of came to the consensus of we both really enjoy roguelikes.
Sure.
So
yeah.
how about we start next week's episode we're going to talk about roguelikes.
Okay.
What makes them good? What makes them not so good? What could we change about, like, certain games, stuff like that? And I think that'll put us at a pretty good spot, because I think both of us have a pretty good idea of what we think will make a roguelike good. So it at least gives us a place to start from.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can go with that.
All right. So,
thanks for listening, friends.
Yeah, I'll think of something to do for, you know, an outro bit or something like that. But but maybe for now, just like, you know, I would say, you know, for this episode, it's probably good. Like, you know, listeners, go check out the games that we talked about today,
Oh yeah,
because
for sure. That's a good one.
100%, like all 6 of the ones that I even touched on today. I'll do a quick rundown of my list, and you probably can too. Is Wild Arms, like, you can do the entire series. I personally think that when they moved to Wild Arms 2, they kind of strayed away from that, you know, unique path that they were going, or either that or they leaned too much into it. But I think Wild Arms is a good series. Darkest Dungeon, available on Steam. I think that's a really good game. I know that there's a lot of controversy around it, but it can be really, really fun if you really put your mind to it. Persona 5, Slay the Spire, Danganronpa, and Octopath Traveler. Those are the 6 ones that I talked about.
Sounds good. Definitely check out Monster Hunter World. I'm playing it right now. It's just absolutely an amazing game. I can't give it high enough praises, and I won't stop giving it high enough praises. If you haven't played Skyrim by now, you're really fucking up in life.
You're really behind the 8 ball on that one.
Yeah, you really need to pick that one up, because that is just it's a unique experience, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's absolutely one that I recommend, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Doom has been a lot of fun so far. I have not beat it yet, but I really have been enjoying it a lot. There's a lot of really cool things about that game, and I highly recommend that one as well. House Flipper is really cool. You can build lots of nice houses. I built a house that was intended for a YouTuber to live in. There was a green screen basement. There was a lot of Jake Paul pictures around the house. It was really a lot of fun. I had a great time designing that. And I highly recommend you check it out and see where your creativity takes you.
Yeah, for sure. So this has been Out of Development Hell, and next time we meet, we will talk about roguelikes and, you know, where they're good and where they're not so good. So I am Kyler.
I'm Mac.
And we'll see you next time.
We'll talk at you again sometime. Goodbye.
Bye.
All right, that went well.
Yeah, that went pretty well. I think that, you know, we actually opened up a lot of, you know, avenues for conversation. And I think, you know, I actually have one of the other streamers that I've been talking with lately. You know, I think he'll really enjoy the kind of conversations that we had, for sure.
I think we could bring on some guests sometime. I have a friend who would absolutely love to do that.
Yeah, and I think I have some friends who would be like, especially like, you know, we're going to talk a lot about video games, like, but that doesn't mean we're, you know, confined to just video games. Like, we can talk about, you know, board games, card games, anything if the opportunity arises where, you know, we think that that's a good idea to talk about.
Sure.
Because I know, you know, there are definitely going to be some. I know that one of the ones that I've kind of been thinking about for one of our future episodes is probably, you know, stuff like Hearthstone, Artifact, Magic Arena, stuff like that, where you have these online card games. I think that there's probably a good amount of discussion we could do on that. We would just need to have someone who is more of an expert on those types of games.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, so I think it went really well. I think we should probably bounce a couple ideas back and forth so that we don't both bring, you know, the same game to our conversations.
Okay, sure. I've got dibs on Rogue Legacy.
Yeah, and I'll probably take Darkest Dungeon for sure. So maybe we'll each have, you know, 2 or 3 examples. At least have one good and one bad way of doing it. Sure. That way, you know, we kind of have that option. So, all right.
Sounds good.
Cool. We'll plan something later.
Cool. Sounds good.
Right.
I'm gonna find somebody to host because I never stopped streaming because I was in the middle of a monster hunt.
Nice. All right.
Stream. Let's go to Mopar. Mopar doesn't need my viewership, but he's a good guy. So.
Yep. All right. Have a good day.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
And everybody go say hi to Mopar. He's a really nice guy.